Dr. Vijaya Parameswaran, and the topic is one that I think is very exciting. It's fasting protocols, what works and what doesn't, and we'll get into a pretty deep dive. But I know this is a topic a lot of you have been asking questions on the community, and there's a lot of interest. Unfortunately, there's also a lot of misinformation floating around, and I think today's conversation will sort of put that to bed. But before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping things. One, please stay on mute and type your questions in the chat window, and I'll make sure to get to them at the end. For those who are already not Longevity Lab members, I think it's absolutely worth becoming one. It's free. And to join, just scan the QR code, and you can be sure that every Thursday at this time, there will be a conversation with a pretty fascinating individual like today's. As always, I announce a couple of community features. Today's new community feature is you're all familiar with Moderator Kai. That's the one who's answering all your questions around lifestyle. We are now introducing Dr. Kai, and it's our expert physicians who are on the team, they're on the back end, supported by Kai, our AI engine. And so it's the equivalent of Moderator Kai. Moderator Kai is backed by clinical dietitians. Dr. Kai is backed by expert physicians. But the role of Dr. Kai is the following. One, we are here to clarify medical information. So if you find something confusing, you've heard a new test that one is being recommended to be done, some new term, some research paper that you've run into, and you want to understand what that means, you just tag Dr. Kai in that message on the community, and the team will provide an answer to help make that clearer and simpler for you. Second, I have to reiterate, Dr. Kai is not here to diagnose, prescribe, or make decisions for you. But Dr. Kai is here to help you understand your options that are on the table for you, or give you options if you don't have any, and prepare for a productive conversation with your doctor. You have to continue going to your own doctor for your medical advice. We're not here to replace your doctor. We're here as that friendly doctor you call after your meeting and saying, you know what, this is what the doctor said. I'm not sure I understood this, or what does this mean? Or this is what Dr. Kai is there to do, is to help provide you a way to understand what your doctor has said, or at times give you the right questions to ask so that your conversation with your doctor is a lot more productive. Right now, there are two doctors who are behind the scene. One is Dr. Rashida Melinkari. She's a consultant physician and lipidologist based out of India. And the other is Dr. Swapna Gadgir-Gambhir. She's a consultant anesthetist and functional medicine physician working out of the UK. We have quite a few others lined up that we'll be bringing online. All of them will be behind Dr. Kai. They're the ones looking at your questions, answering them, and providing you enough information so you can, like I said, have a better conversation with your own doctors. You can continue tagging Moderator Kai when it's a lifestyle question, and for medical questions, tag Dr. Kai. If you're not sure, tag both, and we'll at the back end figure out who needs to answer it. So that's the feature. The other thing that we had announced last week, I'm just providing a little bit more details here, is for members who are operating out of, who live in Pune and Mumbai. We have gone to two of the bigger facilities where you can do all of your imaging tests, and ensured that you get much more meaningful discounts if you are a member than if you were to go straight to them. And as you can see, the discounts are, anywhere from 6,000 rupees for the CT angio to the discounts could be as much as, a couple of $100, 100 rupees, or even 1,000 rupees. So the savings are meaningful. And if you are planning to get any of the tests listed on the screen, go to any of the facilities in Mumbai and Pune that are listed there. The process is simple. Just message the preventive health account in the community, with your name and the lab you want to go to. You'll get a code and you take that code. As always, we take no commissions or cuts. You deal directly with them. We just ensure that if you take the discount code from us, you get those discounts. All right. Our speaker for next week is Dr. Kedar Kulkarni, and he's a cardiologist. And so we'll be doing a deeper dive into all things cardiology. So that's for next week. And then here we are with our guest at hand, and that's Dr. Vijaya Parameswaran. I don't know why it refuses to show your. Okay, I'll just keep it in this mode and let you read it. In case it's not clear, let me know. But I want to introduce Vijaya before we get into the talk. I first met Vijaya about maybe 10 years back, I think 2014, 11 years back, when I was first diagnosed with heart disease at the South Asian Heart Center. And Vijaya was a dietitian assigned to me. And I have to tell you that those conversations, when someone has just been diagnosed, I was diagnosed and I was quite shocked by the result because my healthcare system never said there was anything wrong with me. It was a South Asian Heart Center that told me, and I was in a state of shock because I was told I was at the 98th percentile of calcification of my arteries for my age. My calcium score was 266 when it should have been 0. And those were scary times. And I found my conversations with Vijaya were truly life-altering. I mean, this sounds like a big statement to make, but they were, because her approach was very practical, very scientific, which always I love when something is that practical and that scientific. And in fact, looking back, I must have been a pretty painful participant because I would send Vijaya Excel sheets with my, this is how I'm going to go about it. And she would patiently respond to them with some tweaks. And then I would make those changes and go back to her with, okay, here are some more questions. And, what a complete pain. So Vijaya, 11 years later, sorry for, bugging you that much. But, it did make a big impact on how I went about this journey. And I realized that there is a way to make this journey fun and motivating rather than, unsustainable and feeling like a sacrifice. And I've seen that a lot of other people have been able to enjoy that same journey because we took the learnings from there and applied it to people on our various programs and in the community. Since then, Vijay has gone on to do bigger and better things. She got a PhD along the way and now is working in the division of cardiology at Stanford University School of Medicine. And her focus is actually on exactly the topics we talk about in this community. Cardiometabolic conditions, hypertension, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, obesity. And I think her clinical practice is based at the South Asian Translation Heart Initiative Clinic. So lots of things that she does. But without further ado, Vijaya, welcome to the meet.
Thank you, Nikhil. Is everybody able to hear me?
So let's start, Vijaya, maybe by defining, fasting, because this is a topic people use the word fasting, but everybody has a different meaning in mind when they use the word fasting. So from your perspective, what does fasting mean? And then we can talk about why it matters.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think, Nikhil, it was really interesting again for you to reminisce, when we met, and I'm really impressed with the work and the community that you have built around this topic that you've been passionate about ever since we met. If anything, I see that you have your passion on this and your motivation is contagious. So I find that when we interacted, and as I see you spread this to the community and provide such outstanding information and resources, it really, touches my heart. So So really wonderful. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm excited to speak with you about something that I frequently engage with in clinic and have a lot of personal interest in. So the term fasting, as you pointed out, is very loosely defined. We've seen people use the term fasting when you are giving up a certain type of food. For example, there is Shravan fast. There is, all kinds of. There is Ramadan. There is all kinds of fasting, right? So, what does fasting mean clinically? That is, there is another, we call that the not being fed by mouth. So now we're already introducing this other term, which is fed state versus fasting state. So I think the question that I pursue usually, or before I start answering a question, I often think about what is the outcome that you're measuring? Why are you asking this question? And I think especially the nutrition and the lifestyle, that's really important because, for example, the interest here in longevity and the outcomes that you measure for longevity is still unclear, right? It is easy to study mortality and longevity in mice, not in humans. So I think it depends on what is it that you're asking. But for the layman's definition, which I think is pretty valuable because we are all laymen in that way. I think the question of fasting really is related to not eating. It could be certain foods. It could be eating within a certain window. It could be skipping a meal. It could be patterned. It could be erratic. It could be complete fast. It could be calorie restriction, protein restriction, etc., etc. My biggest value that I see with fasting is, as I see religious practices that have evolved around fasting, I think the primary intent there was to improve your relationship with food, bringing in the awareness of eating something or not eating something. And I think that type of awareness and relationship is one of the first and most important values that we derive from fasting.
Yeah. I think this point you just made, that fasting has been done in some form or the other for many, many hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And this is a question that's often asked is, hey, it's already been done, so it's proven. And it's proven for certain things. But now the stakes have been increased to, but will it increase my lifespan? And those questions, like you said, are still work in progress. But there are some mice studies and there may be some human studies also done that show certain benefits. But we can't still talk about, well, your life is going to increase by, it's another 7 years if you fast versus if you don't fast. But given the different things you spoke about, I know the three things that I have written about in the past, and they're a subset of what you spoke about, were this time restriction of fasting, where you eat within a certain window, the calorie restriction, where you just say, I can eat through the day, but I'm not going to eat more than so many calories. And the third is restricting certain types of foods. I'm going to become vegan only or vegetarian only. There are three different types of subcategories. And then, of course, there is the within time restricted, I could do intermittent for 14, 15, 16 hours. Or some people every now and then do a 36-hour fast, 48-hour fast. Some have even gone to 5 days. And so, but all of that still falls in that time restriction type of bucket, right? Given this framework, is this the right way to think about the framework, or is there a different way to when thinking about fasting? And maybe it comes back to the question you asked, which you started with: what is my objective? Right. So, what are possible objectives one should think about when thinking about fasting?
I think that so to your earlier point about all these types, within even like say veganism or vegetarianism versus eating within a certain time window, or not eating for 24 hours, 36, all of these being called as time-restricted feeding. So time-restricted feeding is more, I would say, specific that you're eating within a certain time. Calorie restriction, macronutrient restriction, micronutrient restriction, all of those would be the different subtypes within, say, veganism, basically macronutrient restriction, right, from animal proteins. So the value of time-restricted eating is profound in more ways than feasible to study currently within the funds that we have. Because in order for us to assess this as an outcome for, say, weight loss, which has been assessed, we know that the value of time-restricted eating and the effect of time-restricted eating on weight loss is variable. The variability is not only intra-individual, meaning different people experience different rates of weight loss. It is inter-individual. It depends on when do you start the time-restricted eating, how long do I follow you for, right? So, so in regards to time-restricted eating, I would say that the biggest value or the prescription around time-restricted eating, again, air quotes, is to align your feeding cycle to your circadian cycle. There's a good work that has come out of Salk, that is good work that has come out of Lango's lab that look at time-restricted eating along the circadian cycle. And this is also, I would say, aligns with what we have known philosophically as well as from our religious practices to eat within, sunrise and sunset, etc. So that's time-restricted eating, which is alignment of the circadian cycle, and we can double-click on that. The other thing which we've talked about, which is calorie restriction, I think that has been shown to have more, I would say, consistent effects with longevity, with better health outcomes. Again, depends on what outcomes we've studied, how many we've studied, etc. And there's obviously room for improvement there. My studies, human studies, etc. But I think with calorie restriction, there is a component of calorie restriction when combined with time-restricted feeding that has shown better effects, improved outcomes. In mice, for example, if you allow them to eat, restrict their calories and restrict that feeding within a time window of 12 hours, that shows significantly, like at least 20% longer lifespan. And if you feed them that same meal aligned with their cycle, which is a nocturnal cycle, the effect of on longevity is up to 35%. Very difficult to do these studies in humans, but we can learn a lot from mice. And I would say that, so that's the component of combining calorie restriction with time-restricted eating. In terms of veganism or vegetarianism, I find that there is also great value there. Doesn't mean that those who eat meat can't get these benefits. You can always choose to not eat a certain food. Could be meat, for example, on certain days of the week, or have more plant-based eating other days of the week, right? So how veganism and longevity have been studied is some work that is done by Christopher Gardner in the twin study, where they looked at the length of telomeres, which have shown to have longer telomeres in those who followed the vegan diet as opposed to the omnivore diet. So going back to the question, if we are looking at outcomes such as weight loss, cardiometabolic outcomes, etc., I think we need to think about what is it that we're studying, what is it that we're interested in, even for our own sake, right? And then adjust.
So, given what you just said, Vijay, it sounds like if each of us were to say, from my situation, let's say I'm a vegetarian, but I also eat chicken. I don't eat any other of the other meats. So chicken and vegetarian. I try and stick to a 9-hour eating window. I would have liked it to be 8, but practically it's 9. And in those 9 hours, I restrict the amount of calories I eat. Uh, in many ways, that is sort of what has been the most proven of all the different combinations. Would you say that? And uh, like time and calories, to your point.
Yeah, I think that, sorry, um, I just, you still able to see me?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So I think yes, the answer to your question in terms of the most proven, I agree. I would take that a little bit further and say that the value of time restriction or an eating fasting cycle, which is 8 and 16, has been incredibly popularized for cardiometabolic benefits, right? And why has that been popularized? Is that something that would apply to you, right? So let me try to answer this question, with that lens, right? So if you are somebody who has been diagnosed with insulin resistance, or has not yet been diagnosed but experiences symptoms such as lethargy after a heavy meal, has darkening around the back of their neck and elbow, pigmentation called acanthosis nigricans, has abdominal obesity that has developed over time, which I think large percentage of the population has that. Where your fasting glucose levels have been elevated over a period of time, didn't start that day, etc. So say you experience some symptoms or have been diagnosed. For such populations, restricting your time window, eating time to 8 and fasting for 16 shows benefit, because beyond the 12 hours of fasting, you are now utilizing serum triglycerides or triglycerides that are in your blood circulation for energy. So that could be thought of as fat burning, right? So triglycerides are a long chain fatty acid. So so that works, right? However, if you don't have, if you've not been diagnosed or don't have such symptoms, or are metabolically fit, then for such individuals, fasting for 16 hours or 15 hours or 14 hours may not be necessary. So, for example, in your case, because I know you and I have seen you in past with the in my clinic, and I know your lifestyle habits, and we discussed some of your clinical parameters. I would say that you could comfortably restrict your fasting window to 12 hours or perhaps 14 hours. Your outcomes will be really good if you fast for either 12 or 14. You don't need to go to 16. And in some cases, it may be detrimental if you go to 16, because your glycogen stores can deplete pretty fast. You are an athlete, and if you exercise in a fasting state in the morning, you're likely to have other issues related to muscle breakdown, etc. So, so that answers, the question on whether to understand if you are a good candidate to try this. And having said that, I think we should all try it. And what I think one of your goals with such communities, and my goal with coming into such podcasts, and the other extra research related and experiment related work that I'm venturing into, is to enable each of us to become our own scientists, right? Is to know what to ask. What am I tracking? Have a very methodical approach in tracking that, and then continuing to learn and iterate on ourselves.
Yeah. And I think that is a very important point. And we keep talking about, you have to be able to advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes you know how to do it, and sometimes when you don't, this is where you come to the community and ask, what are things I could be doing? What should I be thinking about? What is the framework to think about it? Because we might not have all the answers, but we hopefully have the right framework so each person can then plug in their data. So I think that's one important point you made. And the other one that you also made is, if you're going to do any experiment on yourself, make sure there is a outcome that you are tracking. Otherwise, there is no value in doing that experiment if you can't point to something that improved, right? And we keep talking about this in the context of supplements, right? If you supplements, you should know exactly how it's helping you. Otherwise, don't.
Correct.
Given that, I want to take that the whole longer fast, because I hear this question a lot. Well, I have insulin resistance, or I have obesity, visceral obesity I'm trying to deal with. Should I be doing a 2-day, 3-day, 4-day fast more often? And my immediate first answer is, please be careful. Those are not to be taken lightly. And I give a lot of reasons, but I think you are the expert in this. It would be lovely to hear your thoughts on how someone should think about these longer fasts.
I think that it is the reason why we say be careful, right? It is because of micro and macronutrient deficiencies that we often think about. Beyond getting to the level of micro and macronutrient deficiencies, because how these manifest is questionable, right? There are some early signals, right? And when I say advocating for yourself, or like the language that you use, which is advocating yourself, or I say being a scientist for yourself, is to start tapping into how you feel and being aware of that feeling, right? Acidity is one really great example where we could say, I have acidity, and I feel, I don't feel good. That's an early sign, and how that manifests into a macro or a micronutrient deficiency can come in a little bit later. But that is an early signal. A headache, for example. Those who suffer from insulin resistance, ideally, you are expecting their body, their metabolism to function a certain way, which is for the insulin levels to run parallel to your glucose levels, such that as the glucose levels fall, the insulin levels will fall. But by definition, when somebody is insulin resistant, the response of insulin is not that the same process that we would expect it to be. That is why they are resistant. To what extent are they resistant? How long does it take for the insulin levels to come down? Are very difficult to measure, right? So in such circumstances, an early sign that this is not working for me could be a headache. Right? So if you experience headaches and you experience acidity and you say, you know what, I want to muscle through this, I would say that then you have to be even more careful, because these are early indications that your body is not comfortable with this. On the same token, so for such individuals, I would not fast for 24 hours or 36 hours without medical supervision. Even if you are fasting during the active time of the day, if it is more than 4 or 6 hours, you have to be cautious. For example, many of us do very, very cognitive tasks. Cognitive tasks that are usually sedentary, that you're just looking at your computer and you're just burning a lot of glucose because of your brain. Students, for example, right? The way they metabolize glucose is a little bit different because they are very cognitive. Under such circumstances, you have to consider that there is a form of burning which is not really associated with what we typically think of burning energy, which is a form of movement. Oh, I have not moved at all. Therefore, I have not really, I'm in a caloric excess. Not true, right? So the reason I would say that when we say be careful is to look for early signs, which again goes back to the point of understanding what are you measuring. I assume that all of us here are, of course, looking for longevity, but we're also within that framework of longevity, we are looking for vitality, right? Feeling the very best, the ability to live the best life, right? These are some terms that get thrown around. Vitality is being able to do whatever you want with the different definitions, but feeling your 100%, right? So, so that those feelings, I would not ignore them, right? Learn to understand the patterns that dictate such feelings. Be methodical about collecting data, and use the resources like you have discussed with Kai and with your Dr. AI agent, where you could brainstorm, right? So being methodical about collecting, being methodical about asking, identifying what is it that I want to ask, right? It's okay to say it's acidity, and it's okay to say, I don't quite know what it is, but I don't feel 100%.
Yeah. Now there's so much to unpack in what you said, Vijay, because I think there's lots of key insights. One of the points you made, and I think a lot of us, I myself did not realize this until recently, is that, we think of our bodies for movement, like you mentioned, requiring glucose, which is true. But the most glucose hungry organ in the body is the brain. And if it will take up the glucose at the, and sacrifice everyone else along the way, right?
Correct.
And so if you are doing a lot of thinking, okay, you better be feeding yourself the right amount and the right way so that your brain can think clearly. Otherwise, sometimes this brain fog, we often refer to it as that, is sometimes just not having enough energy, which is glucose in this case, right?
Correct. Correct. And just to make one point, and then I'll let you reflect on some of the other things. You may find this interesting. So when I was working on my thesis, and I was writing for hours, I had crafted a diet which was high in refined grains for myself. My children, when they are going through their exams, etc., I prescribe a slightly different way for them to eat than they would otherwise. And there is value in doing this, mainly to your point of recognizing that how am I burning and how much energy is being consumed by the fact that I'm just, that my brain is using it.
Yeah. And I want to share an experience, and I'd like you to comment on this experience. Like you said earlier, when you fast for more than 12 hours, your body is now sort of running out of enough glucose. So it's going to start using triglycerides or the fat, which your body can do. And then after a certain point, if it's really long, then it starts producing ketones. And that's a third source of energy. Right? And I realized when I tried to do a 24 and a couple of times I did the 36-hour fast, there was this transition between my body had used up the glucose. It was using fat, and I think it was beginning to use ketones. But the transition was not happening fast enough. This metabolic flexibility, as it's called, was not happening. And so I started feeling a little bit low energy. And that was a signal to me that, I need to do this a few more times, a little bit shorter, rather than jump to a 36-hour fast directly, right? So that was one observation. The second observation was, and I did not know this, I learned this, is that our body can use, our brains can use glucose. It can't use fat, but then it can use ketones. And so if fat is your only fuel because the glucose is over and the ketones have not yet formed, your brain is running on fumes. Right? And so are all these observations and my explanation accurate, Vijay, or is there something that I've misstated?
No, I think that your observations are very insightful and align with what science shows, Nikhil. What I want to caution people here is that level of awareness that you have, based on how much I know of you, is very high. You're very attuned with how your body feels. Most of us need to invest time and effort to get to that level of attunement. At first, we would go through, it could be related. Oh my God, am I feeling this? And it's fear driven. But you just have to keep working on it, right? So I think what you experienced is very, very aligned. However, what I would say is that while you go through these, when you were transitioning from fasted state to ketogenic state, again, I think there is immense benefit with brain-related clarity and mood in those who are insulin resistant, who experience brain fog as a result of that. There is also an instances where you experience brain fog that are not related to insulin resistance, and that's difficult to decipher. So for that, you need an additional level of awareness, which is how is my body, how am I metabolically, right? So you need to understand what are your parameters, am I insulin, all of that, right? So just going after some of these symptoms is correct, but you also need the second level of awareness. And I think what did you decide to do? Did you go through the 36 hours, or how did you?
So that time I decided to stop it because I was not feeling good.
Yeah.
Then the next time I did it, it was a little bit better, and I could go up to 30, 31, 32 hours. And after 4 attempts, I got to 36. I still don't do it more than once a month. And I want to talk about that a little bit with you about, because if you do it too often, I found that actually, I track my muscle mass. And at one time, I had even done a 48-hour fast. But there is absolutely, the more often you do those longer fasts, I saw an impact on muscle mass, and especially after you're 40 and higher, you're trying to cling on to as much muscle mass as you can rather than letting it sort of go. So, what is your view on these longer fasts? Do they add value? And by longer, I'm defining them as 36 hours or more.
Yeah. I think fundamentally, the value of doing these long fasts are often associated or done in conjunction with different activities and different activity schedules. For example, if you are, say, in a cleansing retreat, in a yoga retreat, or any form of such cleansing, medically managed, right? The amount of activities, the type of activities are going to be restricted. If you go back to thousands of years ago, where you see, foragers or those who ate very infrequently and followed 36, 48 number of days of fast, the activities are also restricted. Your basal metabolic rate continues to drop, and your activities are restricted. So I think it is impractical to go for 48, 36-hour fast, continuing to do the activities that you do, which is you go play soccer, I'm going for a run. It's not practical, right? And where is that energy coming from? What are you compromising? Of course, I have to tap into skeletal muscle. Of course, I have to tap into muscle stored in my organs, right? Because where is the energy coming from, right? So I think that frequency of doing this, again, why are you doing it? Like, are you doing this to become more aligned with how do I feel? Because there's a huge benefit there. Do you feel more clarity? Then I'd say, of course, go ahead and do it. But if it is actually compromising, and if you want a break from your daily activities, like every weekend I want to do a silence retreat where I will eat fast for 48 hours, I would say, okay, that's great. But I wouldn't do that as something that I would do for the rest of my life, right? Again, keep an eye on at least the metabolic as well as the metabolic is, I think, a good word. Parameters that you want to track. What is meaningful for you? Why am I doing this? And reasonable ways to measure it.
Yeah. So the two key takeaways are: make sure you, if you are going to do it, see how your body feels, and to not do the same level of activity that you would have otherwise done, because that activity is going to use up some source of energy, given that you're not putting in food, and that usually ends up being, it'll start, breaking down your muscle, and stuff that you don't want it being used, you don't want your body using as a fuel source, right? Uh,
Exactly.
yeah, and the other point you also made, which I think for people who are trying to lose weight often gets lost, is uh, there is this concept of BMR, basal metabolic rate, which our bodies have a certain level. But if we keep starving our body on a regular basis, the body also automatically reduces that BMR. And then, you know, even if you ate the same amount, it's actually going to put on weight. So, this point about uh, your body is adjusting based on what you are, making it face. And therefore, the results are not always going to be okay. I ate this much, so I'm going to lose weight. But your BMR, if your BMR also goes down, you're sort of fighting against yourself.
Yeah, it's actually the if the discussion around weight loss, I think is there are multiple things there, and it's a longer conversation and very valuable worth having. Um, when you experience when you're starving and when you have lost weight, so some of the parameters that we know of when we calculate basal metabolic rate and your total energy needs are based on your age and your gender, and those are kind of your non-modifiable. Although I would question both these days. But also your physical activity level. Those are some of the things that we take into consideration when we measure caloric needs, right? But when you have lost weight, so your body weight is another parameter that gets into the calculation of your basal metabolic value of basal metabolic rate and your total caloric need. So as you lose weight, the amount of energy that you need is now lower because your basal metabolic rate has been adjusted. It doesn't, and it can cause weight gain. It usually starts with the weight plateauing, right? But we have to understand that the weight that we are tracking also is influenced by sodium intake, also is influenced by quality of carbohydrates, amount of carbohydrates, muscle mass, right? So, but I think so those are all different things, and I think that we have to unpack all of them, and I think it's worth discussing. But at a high level, if we think about what are some ways for me to also, lose weight, but I'm mainly doing it because I want to have that vitality and live a longer life. If that's your objective, short term is okay. I want weight loss, but I'm basically doing this for vitality and longevity. Then I would say calorie restriction, and calorie restriction is ongoing. So now I am leaner, I have lost weight, I'm still continuing with calorie restriction, 10 to 20% calorie restriction, right? You don't have to go up to 30, 40%. You can, depending on what is your baseline, your muscle stores, abdominal obesity, etc. But I would iterate. So if the outcome is weight loss, the prescription that I would follow is different. I think it's worth following. Weight is a really good indicator, at least of metabolic outcomes, right? But I think you have to iterate, and I think a broad theme here is calorie restriction, and then the other theme I think which we will probably touch upon is eating within time windows and being consistent about when you eat. Very, very critical.
Yeah, and I want to just clarify for everyone on the call, the percentage that you spoke about, the 20 to 30%, it's take your BMR, or most of your wearables, your iOS, iPhone, Android phones will tell you your BMR. It may not be perfect, but close enough. You take your BMR number from your wearable, you add your activity levels, which also your wearables will give, or there are some calculators you can use to estimate it. You add them up. Your BMR plus your activity levels, that's the total amount of calorie that your body used that day. And then take a 20% discount on that. And that is the amount that should be your calorie input through food.
Yeah.
And, right? That's sort of right. Is that right, Vijaya?
Roughly, yeah. So when adding the activity to your BMR basically means that the units that is getting converted of that activity is calorie burnt, right? So how many steps did you walk, or what activity did you do? How many calories you burned? Again, an estimate that added to your basal metabolic rate, right? There are, one of my pet peeves here is there are gross estimations that are happening here, right? It is heavily imprecise, and that frustrates me. And I think that there has to be some method to this madness, or this method to this lack of imprecision, where our standard for precision is not obviously precise, but somewhat precise, right? Good enough with precision. And I think that wearable data is very, very helpful, because it gives you some numbers and some trend lines, right? The calorie intake and caloric needs of a day, that's interesting. It's difficult, first of all, to estimate how many calories am I eating. It is difficult to estimate calories from food, although there are resources like yours, Aura, that allow you to take photographs of food to get an estimate. Those are good, right? But we have to start thinking about your day as a unit, right? This meal gave me 500 calories. How much can I eat in the whole day? How much now do I have left for the rest of the day, right? You have to start thinking like that. And what am I eating? How much am I eating? What is the quality of it? Those are the second things, right? So I think that beginning to be a little bit more open to trying approaches to estimating what is it that I'm eating, I think is valuable. It's not all about calories. When I make caloric recommendations, I recognize that it is very difficult to make precise calorie recommendations. For example, when we say a cup of rice, right? What does a cup mean? Right. So if you give an estimate of, fistful, right? My fist is bigger than your fist. This is a cup, right? But I think generally speaking, you can have like a idea. However, when we are talking about weight loss, if you restrict your total caloric intake even by 125 or 250 per day, you will start to lose half a pound of weight. So the precision is important. So if you're grossly overestimating all the time, you're not going to achieve the goals that you're intending to achieve, right? So what I would say is going back to the concept of fasting, and going back to time-restricted eating, and going back to thinking about when I am eating, our tendency is to be eucaloric. Our tendency is to eat the same amount even if we are eating in a shorter window, right? So that's where you start becoming more aware of my speed of eating. How fast am I eating? What am I doing when I'm eating? What time of the day am I eating? Am I being consistent? Because my digestive juices are produced at a certain cycle. There is a circadian cycle with every organ that works in a certain cycle. How to what extent am I aligned with that cycle?
Yeah, and I think we have come back to this topic of circadian rhythm a number of times. I've written about it in my blog post as well, which is that 8-hour or 9-hour or 10-hour eating window that each of us chooses. It also, to your point, depends if that 10-hour window, starts at noon and ends at 10 p.m. Not so good. If it starts at 9 p.m. and ends at 7 p.m., much better, right? Try and have your meals in line with, sunrise and sunset. That's what, is circadian rhythm for everybody on the call. I think most people know it, but just to be super clear. And second point I wanted to make is I at any given point in time, I have tested about 5 or 6 different variables. And I put them all on, and I do all the same activities. And I find that usually most variables tend to overestimate the calories burnt during an activity. Some better than others. I've found like it could be as much as 500 calories difference within one day between what different variables say. That completely throws off any calculations, right?
Yeah.
On the other hand, I've also used all the different tools for calorie counting of your foods through photographs and all of that. And that tends to underestimate the calories. And so, if you just look at that, very often it's very confusing. And so, the general rule of thumb I've come up with is, if I have a 500 calorie deficit in my day, I'm actually at a 0 calorie deficit. So I need to be at a 750 calorie deficit to really have a 250 calorie deficit. And one way I know that this is true is when I looked at my data over a month and my average was 500 calorie deficit, I lost no weight. Okay? When I had a 750 calorie, I lost that half a pound a week type of thing. Now, I was not trying to lose weight, but these experiments sort of gave me a sense for how to calibrate. And of course, these numbers will change depending on what variable you use, what food logging you use. But back to your point, look at data, but look at finally what's happening to you.
Exactly. Very, very well said. I think that's very interesting, Nikhil. And I have similar experience. I'm very discouraged by the overestimation of calories burnt with exercise, right? And especially, so if you're looking at like a hotel treadmill, for example, right? And it aligns quite well with, I think the same algorithm is used in many wearables, right? So the lower your weight, the less calorie you burn with the same activity. You have to remember that, right? And therefore, it is really important that you enter your weight properly. So when I'm in a hotel and I'm working out on the treadmill or elliptical, if it tells me 700 calories, I'm not going to take that at face value. Of course, I want to, calibrate that with my wearable, but it is important that when your weight changes, that you adjust that. So in your wearable data, make sure that if you're now, when you bought your Oura ring and you were, 122 pounds, and if you're 112, you have to adjust it, right? My numbers, and I adjust it, right? So I think that's really important. And I think that what that 750 means for you and why it is 750 for you is very different from what it would be for somebody else. Exactly. But just knowing that there is a delta and you need to have the awareness, I think is really critical and a great place to start.
Yeah. So I want to, we are almost coming to the end of time and we're not even halfway through. We might have to do a second session, Vijaya, later on because there's just so many fascinating things to talk about. But I do want to talk about, there are a lot of terms thrown around. We use insulin resistance, insulin sensitivity, but there's also autophagy, inflammation, and so on. People have now heard these terms. Many of us might not completely know what it means, but we have a general sense that you don't want inflammation. You want to be insulin sensitive, not insulin resistant. Autophagy seems like a good thing to have. But beyond that, we don't know much. And my question is, we might not have time to get into all of it, but what are some blood test markers that one should look at to know whether overall everything that we are doing is helping move us in the right direction, or is it not helping, or is it actually making things worse? So I'll give one example just to start it off. One thing that I don't think too many people told me about, and I had to figure this out on my own, was people kept saying, look at your HbA1c, look at your fasting glucose. Almost nobody told me, look at your fasting insulin, right? And that seems to be a very critical thing. Is that a good marker? And what other such markers should people look at to know their state of health?
I think that fasting insulin is a really good marker. The other really good marker is your ratio of HDL and triglycerides, HDL to triglycerides. We think about total HDL, we think about total triglycerides. So I think that ratio is really critical. The second thing that I think is really critical is your triglyceride levels itself. Fasting triglycerides under 100 shows a superior metabolism as opposed to the reference range, which is under 150. So those are two things in addition to fasting insulin. Inflammation is very tricky to measure. Right. For example, C-reactive protein is something that is often measured, but it's not a good indicator, as you know, right? If you are, in the middle of a migraine going for your blood work, your C-reactive protein is going to be, really high. The general reference range that we look at when we look at C-reactive protein is between 2 and 4. The accepted number is less than 1. So if there is an indication, for example, obesity is another thing that really drives C-reactive protein. So if you are obese and if you find that your C-reactive protein is in double digits, it's probably because of the obesity, and it will come down if you lose weight. So I usually look at a C-reactive protein range between 2 and 4, but in conjunction with several other markers, right? So the fasting insulin, HDL triglyceride ratio, APOB, APOA1, many other things. Hemoglobin A1C, I'm frustrated with that number for those who are in the bucket of pre-diabetes, because time and again we see I see in my clinic is that it is not a good indicator. Also of insulin resistance, it is notoriously misleading. There are many of my patients who are insulin resistant who have normal A1C, and there are many who have elevated A1C who are insulin sensitive. So that we know, I think within our clinic, we've established that we rarely look at hemoglobin A1C, and we do the oral glucose tolerance test and oral insulin tolerance as well. Sorry, I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, I can't tell you the joy it brings me to hear you say that, because I've been on this war footing to try and keep talking about how HbA1c is not a good metric. The problem is, because so many of the protocols around whether to give someone metformin or anything is based only on HbA1c, that people are being given metformin when they don't need it. They're not being given it when they need it, because it's all based on HbA1c, and fasting insulin is not even looked at. And so I'm so happy to hear you say that, and I hope people on the call hear that. Doesn't mean you ignore HbA1c, but don't look at it in isolation to reach conclusions. Look at your fasting glucose, look at your HbA1c, and if you are enthusiastic enough, put on a CGM, because that will tell you a lot about how your body is actually reacting, because everyone needs to remember HbA1c is a 90-day average. I can get the same average with very different types of behaviors.
Correct. I try to be more precise when I talk about hemoglobin A1C. I call it, it's a weighted mean. And we say it's, with 50% of the weightage in the last month. Metformin, that's a longer conversation. Metformin and longevity have been, very fascinating. And I call metformin French lilac because that's what it is. And a lot of work that I do in the clinic, that we all do in the clinic, is to dispel this myth around medications being not good for me. The role of statins and the role of, not to say that you should take them, but metformin, and arguably metformin and berberine, have significantly positive effects with improving with longevity, which I'm happy to dive into it at another call. But hemoglobin A1C, it's very cheap to measure. You see, I think that's one of the reasons why it in a population level is always used. But
yeah. You have now intrigued me so much, Vijaya, with this thing about metformin and all, and you're doing work in this area. I'm sure that's a topic in itself, right?
I agree, because with nutritional studies, right, Nikhil, I think it is challenging to with so many issues, right? So I really value clinical practice, and being able to tap into doing both is how I position myself, is to learn from my clinical experience and continue clinical work, but then rely on the literature and then run my own experiments in lab settings as well as in settings.
Yeah. No, I think there are at least 5 or 10 other big questions and topics we want to go over, but I'm going to just maybe open it up to questions, and we'll get to those other time, the other topics. So the first question: what food should one consume to break the fast, the day after the fast? I think it's a great question, because and what drinks can be consumed during fasting?
I think the food that you eat to break the fast, regardless of the macronutrient composition, I would say that anything that has energy is considered to be breaking fast clinically. So even if it's walnuts or almonds or just nuts, right? That is considered to be breaking fast because of its caloric value. One could say, oh well, then is it like half a teaspoon sugar considered to be breaking fast? And I would say yes, because it does include so to answer the question directly in the interest of time, I would say that it depends on what is your condition. And if you are if I assume that most of us here are interested in this because of our dysmetabolism, because of abdominal obesity, insulin resistance, etc., I would say that the best way to break your fast is to use a combination of good quality carbohydrate with some fat and protein. So one thing I can think of is oats with some nuts and Greek yogurt, or oats with some lentils, like an oats upma or like an oats pongal, like they do in southern India, or an oats khichdi that we do in Bombay and Pune. Something like that is a very reasonable thing to start. Liquid calories, absolutely. I think that so coffee, tea, black coffee, black tea, typically, if you've not added any milk, is considered to be okay with fasting. But for those of us who struggle with acidity, it's a bad idea. Those of us who have arrhythmia or who get headaches with coffee, I would not drink coffee. I would drink, tea, or I would have like lychee water in small amounts. Lemon water works, but not for prolonged time. So yes, the energy that you're drinking is definitely can come in a liquid form, and when you're fasting, you have to count that as well.
Yeah, and just to add one point to what you mentioned, Vijay, is the carbs. You said good quality carbs, and just to clarify, please use complex carbs, right, like oats, rather than simple carbs. And that first meal, especially after the longer fast, don't make it very high calorie, because your body has to still get used to digesting after
Yeah.
a break.
Definitely. Again, calorie restriction through and through, right?
Yeah. What's the desirable ratio for triglycerides to HDL or HDL to triglycerides?
So ideally, you want your HDL. So the 1.5 is a number that has been used, but I think to be more precise, I would say that you want to target a range. I would say that HDL over 40, under 65, and triglycerides under 100 fasting.
So the triglycerides to HDL ratio should be 1.5, but the individual number should also be within the ranges you stated.
Exactly. And the ratio can be lower, by the way.
Yeah.
People who are very metabolically active can have equal numbers of triglycerides and HDL. In some cases, higher HDL to triglycerides.
Yeah. So, Vijay, just to share my numbers. When I was diagnosed 11 years back, my triglycerides were 237 and my HDL was 38. Right? So it was about 6. The ratio was 6. Even though my LDL cholesterol was not that high, this ratio was the killer. Today, my triglycerides are 49 and my HDL is 65. So now my ratio is less than 1.
Yeah.
Right? And low is not a problem. Lower than 1.5 is not a problem.
It's good, actually. So when you go for a ratio, that's why you have to think about the individual numbers in such a case. Initially, it is a good number to target. But again, with HDL, there's a whole different topic on HDL and higher numbers of HDL and our lack of understanding of how HDL works. So
benefits of autophagy over a 24-hour to 36-hour fast, specifically on the immune system and cellular cleansing and toxin removal.
I'm not equipped to answer that question. I would just say that I think that I'm not the expert, but I really think that there is definitely value related to inflammation, but the effects are varied. So I think what we do have consensus on is that we are not measuring the right outcomes properly when we are talking about autophagy, when we are talking about inflammation. Like we said, C-reactive protein is not the right measure. So I would say that not equipped to answer the question, but second of all, we have enough smoke around this to say that, I'm not sure that we're measuring this properly.
Correct. I think that's the biggest issue. Is there is no marker for autophagy like there is for fasting insulin. Right?
Exactly.
And maybe what's a good fasting glucose for a pre-diabetic?
So I would say that the guidelines for diagnosis of prediabetes is between 100 and 123. I would say a fasting glucose period for anybody, recognizing that prediabetes and diabetes are conditions that can be reversed 100%. So the question has to be reframed, saying what is an ideal fasting glucose, and I would say keep it to under, in the mid to low 80s.
Yeah.
There are signs of inflammation or associated risks with insulin resistance, even when fasting glucose levels go over 90. So low 90s to 100. Also, there are inflammation-related effects. So I would say be brave, target it. Ideally, go for
What number would you like to see, Vijaya, the fasting insulin to be at?
So ideally, between 5 and 10, closer to 5.
Yeah. And I think that's the one I would recommend everyone really focus on, that because the fasting insulin is a early warning indicator, right? Fasting glucose shows up many years later. So just focus on getting your fasting insulin under control and doing all the things that we spoke about. I think will help over time bring it down, and then automatically fasting glucose will follow.
Yeah, the only caveat, Nikhil, with the fasting insulin is that, first of all, the measurement with labs vary. It's not the most the most accurate way to measure this is very expensive, as you know, but it could definitely be a surrogate. So I think this is what you mentioned is a great point, but I would not hang all my hat on it saying, oh, my fasting insulin is normal, now look at what has happened. Right? That's not the way to go after it, but it's definitely a first, like you said, a leading indicator that you can start paying attention to. Right. Also, waist to hip ratio, abdominal obesity, very, very good indicator. You don't need to go to the lab for it. You can just look at yourself and tell if you have abdominal obesity. Very likely that there is this metabolism that is the undercurrent of the abdominal obesity. Right. So there's something to, and when I say abdominal obesity, I don't mean abdominal obesity in isolation. I mean abdominal obesity without obesity in other parts of the body, right? So if you're thin in your hands and legs, etc., but I have a belly, right?
Yeah. There are questions pouring in, but I'm going to stop it here, unfortunately, because we are well out of time, and I want to be respectful of your time, Vijaya. But thank you so much for doing it. What I promise people who had questions is we'll make sure to answer them offline in the community. But this has been such a fascinating conversation, Vijaya, which is exactly what I expected. And thank you for taking the time. And if you're up to it, maybe in a couple of months, we'll do a follow-up, because now you've got me very curious about a few very specific questions, which I'm sure the rest of the community will also enjoy.
Absolutely, Nikhil. Thank you for the invitation. I really enjoyed talking with everybody, and I'm looking forward to coming. And the one thing that I think you and I connect on is the insatiable curiosity that we have. And so, I'm looking forward to coming back. And thank you very much. Happy to answer the questions. However you want me to do it. Happy to.
I will absolutely do that. Thanks again, Vijay, and thank you all for listening in.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.